All right, this is the last section of chapter 14, and this is the culture of the Gilded Age. So, the phrase Gilded Age really ties back into the last unit and to kind of some of the stuff that's going on with the immigrants in the cities in this unit, like think about tenements. And then you could also think about electric lighting. So, gilded is a word that means, basically covered in gold. And so this is the Gilded Age because this time period is covered in gold and whatever's on the inside isn't gold. So it's kind of shiny on the outside, base, meaning dull, not shiny on the inside. Um, so again, tenements and electric lighting, shiny lights, miserable conditions under those lights. But there's also something called mass culture, which is basically because of technology, you have culture that is able to spread throughout the country rather than just being localized, kind of like time zones. Great video. If you were in class, you'd watch it. All right, so it's basically all because of industrialization. I would invite you to just take a look at this image and see what they're making. And so the answer is soap. And soap is something that would have been made over hours and hours and hours at home. The original process was you have a fire in your house because your house is heated by wood. You save the ashes all year, and then finally in the fall, when it starts getting colder, you take a big, cauldron of ash. You boil it down. You get the lye out of it. You mix it with fat. You stir that for hours and hours and hours. You got big bubbling, soap, and people don't want to do that, and that's how you get this factory here that's producing the same amount of soap that somebody could produce in a day in minutes. And so it's kind of like when agriculture was invented. You still didn't have hunter gatherers anymore. When, with some caveats, when soap making is invented, you end up having it so people have time to do amusements. So you get things like, well, we'll get into it, but amusement parks, things like that. And so again, this is seen as a good thing. Although there's definitely an argument, do we need all of this stuff? Maybe it's good to make your own soap. I made my own soap, full disclosure, and that's part of the reason this image is in here. So Apple is really, really good at selling you a brand and not just an object. And so that ties into this idea called conspicuous consumption, that your value in your society is based on what you buy. At my very first job, I worked at this behavioral school out in Lancaster, Mass, and the kids just totally bought into conspicuous consumption culture. And I'm sure that some of you have as well. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person or anything like that. It just means you're part of the culture. And anytime they would see my crappy old slide phone, they would laugh at me because they thought the iPhone was what you needed to have. And these were kids who were desperately poor. So it's something that's really, really deep in our society. And it gets into advertising. Apple wouldn't have to do this slick presentation if they were the only cell phone game in town. It's part of the way you sell stuff. So the Amazon of back in the early 19th century and late 19th century, early 20th century was Sears and Roebuck, and it replaces all the specialty stores. So instead of having a hat store in every tiny little town, and you're in Hatfield, and so your hat store doesn't have very many hats, and everybody's unhappy about it, but they can't get to Northampton because it's very far away. You've now got public transport. So if you're in a rural area like Hatfield, you can more easily get to Northampton by streetcar. And if you're in a really rural area, then this is the first time you could buy some of these modern industrial goods in the first place. It's really pretty amazing. It changes people's lives. Small thing that is kind of unexpected about the Sears and Roebuck catalog is, in particular, African Americans love Sears and Roebuck, and especially in rural areas in the South, because the Sears does and the post office do not discriminate in the same way store owners in the rest of the South do because of Jim Crow laws. So if you remember Jim Crow, white supremacy is the law of the land in this country until 1965 in a lot of ways. Oh, just something fun. You can buy a car for $400 out of this new Sears Roebuck catalog. So you get, congratulations, you assemble it yourself. So safe a child can run it was my favorite part. And this is into the concept of, again, beyond conspicuous, things like Apple. So thinking back to the image of the Apple Store, how do you get people to want to buy that thing? So advertising is really the way, and advertising appeals to persuadable parts of your personality, basically. You are a human being, so you trust people. By trusting people, you're more likely to listen to what they're going to say, and then you're more likely to take their advice, maybe about a product. An example of this would be if see a product endorsed by a celebrity. Pathos is emotion. If you remember back to the Sarah McLachlan ads where she's got all the crying. I'm sorry, I guess I'm crying. There's sad animals with music playing under the background as they tell you to adopt an animal. That's another ad. And then logos is facts. So when you see I don't know, a silly example, snap crackle and pop. Oh, did the cereal actually snap crackle and pop? Well, not really, but people will take that as factual evidence. A better example would be these shoes have a lifetime guarantee and will return them if they break. That kind of thing is how you encourage people to buy products. This is real. Um, this is basically a time period. You can see some of the ways that advertising was used to try to convince people to buy this product. Got the kids. There's your pathos, right? They're building a little house. Look at how happy they are. They got their toothache drop, so they're not playing. Logos, price is 15 cents. And ethos is branding. So you see a brand. If you believe in Apple as a brand, they have persuaded you using the idea of ethos. That's trust. That one's blank. So these are a bunch of newspaper publishers. They are basically the news anchors of the day. They are television personalities, YouTube stars, whatever you want to call them. And yes, they all have facial hair. And yes, they are all white dudes who own newspapers. So Joseph Pulitzer is probably the most famous of them. His name, obviously, you recognize as the Pulitzer Prize. And he basically creates a cheap newspaper funded by advertising, which is relatively new. His rival, William Randolph Hearst, also uses ads, and they basically are just fighting it through the newspapers the entire late 19th century. And everybody's reading the newspapers, just by the way. Dime novels, so people like Mark Twain, Arthur Conan Doyle, Sherlock Holmes, Jules Verne, who wrote 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and you start to get serialized characters. People like what they like, and they want to read 100 stories about the same folks. See Batman in the near future. Hey, look, it's Smith Academy. So, Smith Academy is one of the earliest public high schools in the country. Actually, misspoke. It's one of the earliest high schools, period, in the country. It doesn't become a public high school until about a little bit after 1900 or so, when it gets taken over by the town. The concept of kindergartens basically borrowed from the German Empire to try to make it so poor people actually knew how to read, because that was a major issue in every country in the world. In rural areas, there's a lot of demands on your time. And it's an interesting combination of people that want high schools to be formed. You've got factory owners, so they want to churn out cogs, to basically work in their machine, to kind of extend the metaphor. You've got nativists, so anti-immigrant folks who think that you need schools to force immigrants to learn English and to turn them into real Americans in their mind, kind of break down their culture and assimilate them into the melting pot. And then you also have people like Jane Addams, who's the founder of the Settlement House movement, who advocate for high schools because they think, yeah, they may lose some of their culture, but we can do this in a way that, by learning English doesn't mean it make you less of an immigrant. It makes it so you have the tools you need to succeed in society. And, you can kind of see the tension still in high schools from that. New entertainment. It's the 19th century. I've said it before. There are no rules except for have a great time. No, but really, like Coney Island in New York, right off the coast of the Atlantic, so it's right off of Long Island, is the first ever amusement park ever. The first roller coaster opens up and it's 10 cents a ride, and they earn $600 a day for years. And, this is an image of it. It's just a simple whoop, whoop, whoop. That's the noise of going up and down. That Wild West show, you basically have Native Americans and so-called cowboys invent the idea of the Wild West and bring it to these amusement parks. So just emphasize the Wild West was not wild. It was something created for people's entertainment, and it still is. And so Bill here was one of the people that did that. The Chautauqua movement is is basically, or Chautauqua is a storytelling kind of variety show. It's one of the places where movies first get produced. This is a time where there's like wandering shows of people doing variety sketch kind of things. And so that's also part of this. Oh, motorcycles. The coolest. More motorcycles. Again, there were no rules. Oh, look, another motorcycle. This one, I mean, does this count as a motorcycle? This is a death trap, but. And oh, the first Ferris wheel was built by Ferris. I believe this is at the White City at the Chicago Exposition in 1893. Vaudeville has some troubling parts, as you can see in this still image of the video, including widespread use of blackface. Um, and so they often make jokes about race. They're trying to, God, it's the beginning of, oh, we make fun of everybody, regardless of the race kind of attitude. But it's a variety of different kinds of activities. And there's a lot of American culture that comes out of these that you may not even be aware of, especially the musical aspect. Ragtime, jazz, roots of rock and roll, blues. And so, kind of the beginning of modern American culture. Baseball pops up in this time period as a national sport. It had been adopted by Americans during the Civil War from old English games are called rounders, and basically the Civil War teaches everybody the same set of rules. They go back; these leagues are formed. 1912, Fenway Park was built, built during the Gilded Age. Volleyball, basketball invented in Holyoke and Springfield, and this is relatively racially segregated, pretty much consistently across the board because this is a deeply racist society we're talking about in this time period. Here's an early version of baseball. You can see it's really a diamond. It's always a diamond, but there's no bases. There's just kind of squares. Oh, this one has the first middle finger ever caught on camera, but this is also one of the first pictures of the Boston, I think it's the Boston Braves, and this is Fenway Park. See if you can find it. The earliest Boston baseball club, more Boston Braves. And here's some of the earliest videos ever recorded, which I highly recommend. It's kind of neat. Okay, and we're done.